Hello. So, welcome to today's No Cabin Fever today. We have Boris Berenberg with us from Atlas Authority, and he will talk about improving Atlassian notification. Boris, the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot. Let me share my screen here. And can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So while we called the talk "Improving Atlassian Notifications" for kind of the marketing of this event, the full name of the talk is "Signal versus Noise in Atlassian Applications," but it's a little long to put on a tagline. And essentially, you know, the goal here is just to talk about how can we get more value out of all the notifications coming out of Atlassian tools. So a little bit of background, I come from Atlas Authority. We are an Atlassian partner and marketplace vendor. We do all the typical Atlassian stuff, but we're not going to talk about any of that today. Today we want to talk about kind of notifications, and specifically how that relates to us is that we make a tool called Notification Assistant for Jira. And this means that you can use this tool to send out notifications via email, Slack, and other channels. And I think we're probably the only people that make a tool like this that want to encourage our users to send fewer notifications, not more. So kind of diving into kind of why that is and what our thoughts are around how notifications should work. You know, push notifications have been a thing for literally thousands of years. People have been walking up to one another and tapping each other on the shoulder and disrupting whatever they're doing. And then, you know, we had the evolution of like calls and telegrams, and then we got emails, and then now we have like text messages and Slack. And then if that wasn't enough, we now have push notifications showing up on mobile and desktop. So we are at a point of peak interruption of whatever we're doing. And you know, normally when I present this talk, it is in a live context, and so I ask the audience to raise their hands if you've gotten some of these throughout the last workday. And I mean, that's not really going to work in a webinar format, but the point is, after the audience raises their hands, is I will ask them if though all of those notifications were actually useful, right? And it's never the case that all of the notifications you're getting is useful. So the question is, like, why do we deal with this, right? Like, why are we like okay with being subjected to all these interruptions that don't actually provide much value? And kind of the big answer here is to get done, right? And it's not profanity. We're here to actually just get work done. And you know, ultimately, you know, all of these tools come together to support that. And so I travel a lot. In 2019, I was away from home more than half the days of the year. And a lot of that happens on flights. And, you know, right now this talk is being recorded in the middle of the COVID epidemic. So flights are less of a thing, but because I fly a lot, I look at like flight regulations. And this is from the US policies. And I don't want anyone to try and read this whole thing. But this is just, you know, the Code of Federal Regulations. It's the laws that govern how flights kind of behave. And there's one section in particular that's really important. And it says no flight crew member may engage in activities such as non-essential conversations, non-essential communications between the cabin and cockpit crews, and reading publications not related to the proper conduct of the flight are not required for the safe operation of the aircraft. And what they're really saying is that when you're flying a plane, don't goof off and get distracted, because a lot of people's lives depend on you and a lot of things can go wrong. So it's really, really important to focus. And this kind of policy exists globally. So, you know, when we look at how our team members operate and how we operate, we should also keep in mind that, you know, disruptions, interruptions, all these things can have a significant cost. And there's a lot of research to back this up. So we know that, at least in the United States, if you're looking at mobile devices, there's about 46 push notifications per day on average. For people like myself, that's in the 250 range. On top of that, once, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but once you get interrupted, it takes about 23 minutes to refocus. I dug into that. That's not super accurate. It's about 5 minutes for most people in work context, but still, it's a lot of time. And then McKinsey, who's a big consulting firm, they looked at executives and found that if they're not interrupted for extended periods of time, they're about 5 times more productive in terms of the amount of work and the quality of work that they can put out. So, but what does this mean, like when it comes back to you know, our very like hands-on usage? We see that 83% of users admit to using a smartphone to check work email after hours. So that means that your staff and your peers are essentially constantly being bombarded with work emails outside of work hours. And the real question is this necessary, right? And what can we do to improve that? And then during the business day itself, we're looking at a 15 times per day that people are checking their email. That works out to once every 37 minutes, roughly. If you consider anywhere from 5 to 23 minutes of refocus time, you see that there's very little actual get stuff done time in between. And so this is kind of a pretty bad situation to be in. And you know, it's not like it happens in a vacuum, right? Because the users push back on this, right? A lot of people will set up email filters, like if I get an email from Jira, automatically put it in the trash. This is not an uncommon situation that that we see. We also see end users using third-party tools to kind of to force focus. So there's adios.ai, which makes it so that your email only shows up 3 times a day. There's pause Gmail, where if you're using Gmail, you can literally go hit a pause button, and until you unpause it, no new emails will show up. And people are you know, a lot of people will check these emails compulsively because they think that they have to respond immediately. And actually, I'm one of those people. If you email me, I typically respond within a couple of minutes. And I'm actually wrong to do so because when research was conducted, the expectation of your coworkers for a response time is, you know, it varies. But if you get back to it within a 4-hour time span, you will satisfy more, like about 57% of your coworkers. And in practice, this is a limited study, and this is focusing specifically on US workers, and expectations globally are very different. And then, you know, we have email wasn't enough, so we said, hey, let's create synchronous chat because we need more disruption. So we have like Teams, Slack, Mattermost. Those are kind of the big players, but there's a bunch of other ones like Riot, Matrix, and a couple other ones. And I think that there's this great quote from Jason Fried. He's the co-founder of like Basecamp, Highrise, Campfire, Tadalis, Rightboard, a bunch of these tools. And the reason why this quote is funny, he says, group chat is like being in an all-day meeting with random participants and no agenda. And it's funny because his company makes a group chat software. So you know, it's somebody who has that self-awareness to understand what is the risk of the product that they create. And just like with email, guess what? Users respond to this, right? There is this our time to think, and it is a way for teams to schedule do not disturb for everybody across the entire team in order to kind of reduce these periods of disruption that occur. And this site called getlowdown.com takes all your Slack stuff and converts it into an email, because, you know, what we need is more emails. You know, we saw this posted by a competitor of ours who makes a Jira Slack integration, and they said, hey, over 20 million Jira emails purged. And I thought that was a really funny thing to post, because I was wondering, would 20 million emails be more disruptive or less disruptive than 20 million Slack notifications? And you know, I personally feel like email is less disruptive than Slack. They feel otherwise, but you know, I encourage you guys to make your own decisions here. And kind of the point here is, like, am I saying that email is bad or our chat app's evil. And in practice, no, neither is true. They're both just tools. They're just there to get the job done. Just like Jira, you can configure and use them correctly. And you can also misuse them and really annoy your users and anyone else kind of working with your system. So, you know, we have to understand why disruption happens and what can we do to influence it. So we want to talk about kind of the 5 whys. So who, what, where, when, why. So when we send a communication, right? Who is the audience, right? Like if you get a notification and you look at it and you're like, why am I getting this thing, right? Like this has nothing to do with me. I don't need to be informed about this, right? For example, a very easy thing is we're working with a client right now where I have the first 3 letters of my username matching with a bunch of other people in the company, and those people keep getting notified for things that I'm working on, right? Total failure of audience. We have the what, which is like the content, right? So if you get an email or you get a Slack notification and you have no way to parse the actual content there, like if it tells you that, hey, a Jira ticket was created and absolutely nothing else, right? What, cool, maybe it's high importance, maybe it's not, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. Channel, right? So where is the notification coming from? What channel is it being delivered by? Like if it's a really critical issue, should it go in my email? Or if this is not critical, why was this pushed to my cell phone through text messages? Timing, right? Like, why am I getting this now? Again, like, if it's critical, like, why did I not get this till 9 in the morning? Or if it's not critical, why did it ping me at midnight? And finally, context, right? Like, if I send you this notification, I say, hey, there's an outage on a service, but I don't understand how important that service is, right? If this is a service that runs once a month, like whatever, we'll deal with it, right? If this is like a core functionality of whatever we deal with, then then you know we need to respond immediately. And having that context directly in the notification can really help create value. And there's this formula called BMAT. And it was created by a guy named BJ Fogg, and he's a researcher of kind of human-computer interaction and motivation at Stanford. The people from like his students are literally the people who created like the red circle on notifications in iOS and other things like that. And BMAT stands for behavior equals motivation plus ability plus trigger. Right? And so we have to think of any notification that we send in that context, right? Like, what is the behavior that we want to create? You know, does the notification support the motivation? Does it support the ability? Does it support the trigger? So the question is, great, we've got the stuff, right? Like it's really spammy, it's disrupting everybody. How do we make things better? And today I want to talk about kind of 2 primary methods here. And in the Jira world, I think that these are the easiest to achieve, and they are kind of reduce the number of recipients and reduce the number of notifications. There's going to be other things that we can do, but they're just not within the scope of kind of this short talk. So the first thing of reducing the number of recipients is, you know, don't put roles into notification schemes in most cases. Matt Dorr was the one who taught me this a long time ago, and I think he may actually be a participant on this call. The idea here is if you are in Jira and you put a role into a notification scheme, then your users can very easily, or rather your project administrators can very easily go in and take something like the Jira users group or whatever broadly accessible group you have and put it in that role. And then whatever action you want can send out a notification email to absolutely everybody in the entire company. And there's no good way to block that from the user perspective. So we don't want to put roles in notification schemes. We also want to try to notify individuals instead of groups whenever possible. And then we can escalate to more and more people as the situation demands. So you know, if you want to send a Slack notification, you want to send a Slack notification to an individual, for example, not a channel. So to kind of give an example of that, in our app, right here, this is simply a escalation use case that says, hey, if a ticket in our IT service desk hasn't been updated in the last 5 days, then at 8 in the morning, notify the manager of whoever the reporter is via an email, right? And we can pull the manager dynamically because that field is integrated from LDAP using a third-party application like Elements Connect, or what used to be called NFeed. So really, really easy to set up. Takes about 2 minutes, and you've essentially solved, you know, single-tier escalations, like automated escalations that don't require end-user interaction, and improve notifications in this manner. And in general, you're going to want to use digests, right? So this is going to reduce the number of notifications. Jira in newer versions now supports digests that can happen. I'm forgetting the interval. I believe it's up to a maximum of 2 hours between notifications. Some people want longer durations, but that functionality is already in Jira's native notifications. We allow in our app for fully configurable schedules and fully configurable contents. The contents being, you know, something that you can either write a template for, or in our upcoming version, we have like a drag and drop editor that'll make it easy. And then in Slack, the native integration doesn't do direct messages. We don't do direct messages at this time either, but some of our competitors in the marketplace do. So, you know, you can check it out and find ways to kind of use that type of logic. And so here's like a really easy example, right, where we configure a notification like before, but we set a Slack as a destination. We put a really, really simple message summary into it, where we're just putting, you know, the browse URL to the key and the summary. And then so, you know, in this case, in my test instance, it happens at midnight, but it just sends a list of all of the matching service desk demo tickets and the summary. So that gives you kind of the ability to click into it. It gives you some context. And if we wanted to customize other information in there, we could. And it's really kind of, again, about figuring out how to solve that specific who, what, where, why, and that B-matrix equation for the specific business challenge that you're looking to address. But Jira is not the only one. Confluence is notoriously spammy, especially kind of in large installations where people end up watching a lot of content. I've seen the nuclear option where people have just disabled emails entirely in Confluence. Then kind of the less nuclear option, but a kind of middle ground is to use the No Email Storm application from Stillsoft. This makes it so that little checkbox at the bottom, which says, you know, notify if changes, it changes it into a button and makes it, you know, a little bit harder to send out an email notification. And then, you know, that kind of thing can be combined with using a third-party outbound mail app, such as MailPage from Cybermedia, which is the one that, you know, we have some experience with. And that allows you to really kind of customize what that email that's being sent out looks like and what's in it to really support creating that context and presentation that your users will be able to really consume and use effectively. The use case for kind of improving what goes into these emails is especially useful, both in Confluence and in Jira, when you're communicating to users that don't tend to use the tools, right? So if you need to send a report to some, you know, executive or a VP and say, hey, these are all of the these are the projects that are being tracked in Jira that are currently, you know, marked as like at risk or something, right? Like that person never uses Jira. They live their life in meetings and email. So the formatting of what you send them is going to be critical to them being able to consume that information and act on it effectively. And knowing that you can create a lot more value for these users, and having them have a lot more buy-in back into these tools because they get that easy summary, because they get that easy value. It goes a long way to really kind of delivering a high value tool for all of your internal customers. And that's the presentation. So I just want to say thank you very much. If you have questions about where I got this information, I do have another slide with a bunch of sources, kind of what I found and where I found it. I can share that with you. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I almost said Tinder. Reach out to me on Twitter, and I'm happy to share that information with you. And then I guess at this point, we will take some questions. So
here is hi from Matt Dorr for you, Boris. I don't know if you can see the Q&A window. And Matt Dorr is writing, the fog model was new to me, interesting. So yeah. I think that's more a statement than a question. Yeah. Any other questions? No, I don't think so. So I would say thank you very much, Boris. We have this talk recorded. It is visible, I think, tomorrow on the No Cabin Fever Today channel on YouTube, or you can also view it via the website. Tomorrow we will have a moment. I have a slide for that. Who's tomorrow with us? Yes, here from K15T, Boosting Confluence Adoption Remote Edition with Matt Rayner. Thank you very much for attending today's No Cabin Fever. Thank you, Boris. Thanks for a very impressive talk. Have a nice day and see you then. Bye-bye.